Just a few scattered showers, mainly near Atlantic coasts, but the odd one elsewhere. A cold night ahead with lows of -3 to +1 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now you're welcome along. So Wednesday Night Rugby, I should let you know, by the way, Spurs have scored against Norwich City. Vertonghen with the goal, 18 minutes gone. So 1-0 to Spurs. It is 0-0 between Sheffield Wednesday and Manchester City. And Leicester City, Birmingham City also 0-0 after 20 minutes or so. We have Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent here in studio. Cian, thanks for coming in.
Hey, Joe.
And Tom English of the BBC over in Scotland. You're there?
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for joining us. No Irish game to discuss this week, so it's a slightly strange one. We'll still touch on Ireland, I suspect. Let's start with coronavirus and the situation. The breaking news this evening is that Serie A have announced, in conjunction with the Italian government, obviously, that all Serie A games will take place behind closed doors until April. Now, to what extent the Italian Rugby Federation want to have a Six Nations game and all the revenue it might bring in behind closed doors with England, I don't know. But that's the latest in Serie A. Cian, as I understood it, the FFO were meant to meet with the French government today, and I thought we'd have white smoke on Ireland's game by now. It's one of the reasons we're doing this live. Usually we do this a bit earlier, and yet I'm hearing nothing.
That's very French, isn't it, really? Because when you think about it, last week, wasn't it Wednesday, when the IRFU had the meeting with the government, it seemed like they had to give enough time for it to postpone the game, but I was fully expecting to hear something as well. Italy have obviously made their decision. That will obviously impact on England going to Rome next weekend, but yeah, it's just the most French thing ever, isn't it, not hearing it? But you'd imagine we'd probably hear something over the next couple of days.
What's the word in Scotland, Tom, and all this?
Well, again, I'm slightly surprised that the game at Murrayfield on Sunday is going ahead. There's been not a lot of chat, relatively speaking, that it's not going to go ahead. And now the number of cases in Scotland are up to 3. There was 1 a couple of days ago, but overnight there's been another 2. Everyone's saying that those numbers will rise, but seemingly very little chat about this game ever being in danger, to be honest, which is kind of slightly surreal given what's happening elsewhere.
Given that the Ireland-Italy match will certainly have to be replayed, Cian, what are the options in the calendar should the final weekend, say those games go? Where are we?
It's complicated by the fact that the World Cup, players need extra time off. That's the reason Ireland are only playing 2 tests in Australia in June. Normally they'd play a 3-test tour. So I think that was putting it in that window was obviously ruled out because they needed the extra break. Then you're looking towards September, sort of the start of the season. But I think a lot of those guys would be given a prolonged break into the pre-season. So what we're hearing on the ground is that October will be the most likely sort of scenario, and obviously, that brings back what happened in 2001 with the foot and mouth. It seems like the most likely IRFU obviously need this game to go ahead. They're not even entertaining the idea that it's going to be cancelled. There's obviously a big difference between it getting cancelled and postponed. I think it's worth a minimum 5 million, which is pretty topical at the moment when you think about rugby and money and things like that. So they're pretty optimistic that it will go ahead, but a Six Nations game against Italy in October just for the Champions Cup would be pretty strange, wouldn't it? Especially
if France win the Grand Slam and it's utterly meaningless.
Yeah, but they still need the money, so they'll have to find some way of flogging the tickets for it, won't they? Yeah.
So, OK, well, we're holding our breath really globally, and as rugby's just a part of that, so we'll have to see what happens. I might just touch on Ireland for a moment, if I can, gentlemen. No game this weekend. I'm not too sure what's happened in camp. It's been very quiet. They certainly haven't felt the need to hold press conferences because, well, there's not very much to talk about except questions about Twickenham arising again, and the last thing they want to do is provoke another news cycle revolving around Twickenham. So do we know, Cian, what's gone on? Are they training full on? Are they getting teams in to play against? Is it put your feet up? What's the word?
It would have helped if they had done at least sort of one media gig this week to sort of fill the vacuum that we have, because you're kind of in no man's land. But yeah, they've gone about it as a normal week. So they met up on Sunday evening. That would be pretty normal. They trained on Monday, probably a harder session than normal on Monday because they had no game, obviously. Previously, they trained yesterday. I believe that was a pretty full-on session. It was just between themselves. They broke yesterday evening, had today off. They'll come in this evening again to train tomorrow. And I believe their training against the team hasn't really been said, but Andy Farrell made reference to last week that they'd be getting a team in, but I haven't heard that it's going to be a province or anything like that, which would have been pretty interesting if they had gotten a province in to train. But it sounds like it's going to be the Ireland under-20s again, because they're actually going for a Grand Slam themselves as well. And I know it's not obviously, on everyone's agenda, but it's still pretty important to those young guys. So it sounds like, Ireland are going to train against the Ireland under-20s tomorrow, which is pretty different. They'll break again. They're not going to do anything this weekend, and then they'll come back in and start the cycle again on Sunday evening, hopefully with a game to prepare for France. But you'd imagine the uncertainty is just, it's quite difficult, I'd imagine, to make plans, because you can plan for all you like, but it just seems unlikely that this game is going to go ahead in Paris, at least with a full crowd and all that. You look at France last week, they cancelled their half marathon on Sunday, large gathering events, which seems to be the biggest issue. Like Tom raised the point there, it is pretty surprising that maybe more of a deal hasn't been made over in Scotland about the game, even being behind closed doors. But I'd imagine it's the uncertainty alone, I imagine, is quite difficult for the players to sort of get their head around. Certainly is from my point of view.
Gordon Darcy was writing a piece today in the Irish Times, and he was harking back to 2001, and this was a very different time, but he was effectively saying, with the foot and mouth situation, and there were no games going on anywhere and no training anywhere, basically these were the early days of amateurism. They just went on the absolute tear, midweek, weekends, put on a fair amount of weight, just had a great old time. So that's not quite happening this time around for Ireland. Andy Farrell...
The glory days of rugby,
yeah. Indeed.
It's never the same.
No. Andy Farrell has plenty of problems to juggle post-Twickenham, Tom. What did you make of the performance? What do you suspect are the big things on his mind at the moment?
Well, I was kind of dismayed, but not surprised by the performance. It's just a repeat, isn't it, of what we've seen Ireland against England in recent times. I don't quite understand. Like, I can understand why England can overpower Ireland, because they have a pretty monstrous pack. If you go back to the first game of the championship, Ireland versus Scotland, Scotland out-muscled Ireland that day. I mean, physically, I think they won that battle. That we haven't seen that for a long, long time, Joe. And that, if you look at, it's the fact that Ireland struggled against England, that is no great surprise, because when England get it right, they can beat anybody. They beat New Zealand. And I thought they were exceptional for 40 minutes anyway, they were exceptional. But the performance that Ireland put in against Scotland was a very strange one. And actually, that would be the one that would worry me the most, because Scotland's confidence was very, very frail. They had a guy playing loosehead, Rory Sutherland, who hadn't played international rugby in 3.5 years. And okay, Ireland won the match for sure, but they were poor, and physically they didn't look to have it. So it wasn't a big revelation that they lost badly against England. I think Farrell will be cool enough, but on the outside, but on the inside, I'm sure he's wondering where's the power gone? What's happened to Furlong? What's happened to the beasts that he had a couple of years ago? Where are they?
Yeah.
They don't seem to be around anymore.
Yeah, and that was, in broad terms, the general vibe around the team in 2019 was a lack of dynamism, a lack of energy, a lack of oomph, and the rehabilitation keen that we all maybe hoped was there post the Wales game has evaporated slightly post Twickenham. And there just seemed like a lot of fires for Farrell to deal with. So take, for instance, the Sexton versus Raj thing, which blew up again. So that's actually less about Sexton and more about where this team is in terms of leadership. So Ron Nagar was on the show 10 days ago or so and made the point that he was never a fan of Sexton as captain. And the rationale for that was not that he thinks Johnny Sexton is a bad captain, far from it. His point was almost that Sexton, just because of circumstance and age and his profile, is the de facto leader of this team regardless. And actually, this is a team where maybe more leadership needs to be empowered. Now, is that James Ryan? I don't know. Joe Schmidt was at an event pre-Christmas, and I asked him about Ryan, and he said, yeah, maybe he's ready, maybe he's not ready. And I read into that, personally, he's not ready. I just don't want to come out and personally say that in too grand a way. Regardless, whether you make Ryan captain or keep Sexton as captain is not going to change the fortunes of the team. But it spoke of a wider issue, and Johnny Wilkinson on ITV in a really interesting way summed it up as well. So separate to Rog, Wilkinson was watching the game, and he was saying things like, as number 10, you're the decision maker. And my feeling is it's difficult when you establish yourself. And Johnny, has become established in global terms. He's a star. So when new players come into the team that weren't his generation, I think, and that's a lot of the Irish backs, he said, they're coming in, there's an established guy in the leadership position. It's very difficult because there's a relationship there. You almost have to respect them, but they haven't had that respect that's been built up by growing up with it. The problem is that there's a leader and a 10, and you start to do everything you can, and the players around you think, okay, well, we'll just stay off and let him do his thing. And then he said the 10 is thinking, I've got everything on my shoulders. And the players around him are thinking, he doesn't want us involved. And Wilkinson said, it happened to me a bit as I got older. He said, it looks to me like Sexton's carrying a lot. Then you add in captaincy, and now you're saying he's not just in charge of his backline, he's now in charge of the entire team, and not just the direction of the team, but the decisions everywhere. That can't be easy. What he might be wishing is that everyone around him plays their best, and he just sits back and directs. It never looks to me like Sexton gets a chance to direct. He's in the middle of everything. It's quite a long quote, but it's a thoughtful and nuanced point. And I was thinking, so say Ryan isn't quite ready. Peter O'Mahony, a one-time Lions captain, not sure of his place. Tadhg Furlong just in the leadership group, it seems. Ian Henderson getting to grips with Ulster captaincy. Conor Murray unsure of his place. That backline around him. Keith Earl seems like an amazing pro, not quite captain material. Very young players around him. If you're Andy Farrell looking at this maybe leadership deficit, that is just one more issue to try and sort out. And it's far more complicated than Sexton captain, not captain. That's not really the discussion. It's about the leadership in the team at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the reason Johnny Sexton is involved in everything is because that's the kind of guy he is. I mean, it didn't take the captaincy for him to do that. He was always the leader of this team under Joe Schmidt as well. And I think, you know, whatever about people in the media, you know, saying stuff that maybe he shouldn't have been captain, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. Personally, I thought he had earned it for what he's done for Ireland over the years. He has been the Leinster captain as well, let's not forget. But I think some of the abuse that he took, particularly on social media, and like I was actually talking to Ian Keithley about this recently, because he was on the end of some similar really bad criticism when towards the end of his Munster career. It's like whatever about saying something on Twitter, it's when you actually mention the person and to make sure they kind of see it. So I think he had his back up. That was at the press conference last Friday, sort of about he felt, I think, a lot of that criticism. Now, a lot of criticism, he had a poor game at Twickenham by his own very high standards, but I think maybe Rog coming out then and saying that again was maybe kind of tipped him over the edge, because he came out with that quote saying, when you're the conductor of an orchestra, sometimes you have to turn your back in the crowd and not look back, you know. So it was clear that it was playing on his mind, that he didn't just, because it was a pretty good, interesting quote, he didn't just roll that off the tongue. So in terms of there being a leadership deficit, like, I don't know, I think it is still very shortly after World Cup. I think Andy Farrell has mixed it up. Like you mentioned, Tadhg Furlong, he's come into the leadership group. I mean, we were asking him about this a few weeks ago. He was surprised when he was, you know, asking, because it's just not in his makeup at all. So Farrell is clearly trying to mould new leaders. And even James Ryan, I would have been one who would have seen the value in sort of giving him the captaincy. Now, I know I'm contradicting myself by Sexton sort of earning it, but I could have seen the logic in starting sort of a fresh cycle with a guy who, I think all things being equal, he will be Ireland's captain in France in 2023. But even from just his dealings in the media, because I would have dealt with him throughout his 20s days, and he never says anything. He's such a quiet guy, gives nothing away. But in this Six Nations, he's done one or two press conferences and he's been much more outspoken. You can tell he's sort of feeling his way into it. And I know that's only a real small snapshot of what we see, but hopefully behind the scenes that's growing as well. I think, you know, Peter, you're right, Peter O'Mahony's the Munster captain, but he's not sure of his place. Ian Henderson obviously missed the game in Twickenham due to the birth of his son. So I think there are leaders within this team. It's just, I mean, trying to find their voice under what Farrell wants, because let's face it, none of these guys are new kids on the block either. I mean, they've been there, they've done that, so it probably is time that they started taking leadership and ownership for what's going wrong. Because Tom is right, I mean, Ireland got out of jail in that Scotland game, and while you were kind of willing to give them a free pass because it was their first game under Andy Farrell, it just came unstuck again in Twickenham. And I think that's why the Italy game would have been so important this weekend, because it would have been a guaranteed 5 points at home. There's no point in saying otherwise.
Yeah.
It would have given Farrell a chance to, you know, play the likes of Caelan Doris, Ronan Kelleher, possibly John Cooney, a couple of others. I don't think there would have been wholesale changes, but I think it would have been part of a wider plan that no matter what happens, let's play a couple of these guys in Italy. Suddenly that chance is gone now. And it's kind of, is Farrell going to be brave enough again if the game in Paris goes ahead to sort of stick with that plan?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest issues that he faces now over the next week.
Yeah, for sure. On the leadership point, Tom, be interesting to get your take on it. I don't want to overstress the point because there are different ways to lead, and Keith Earls is a leader in his own way as well. But it was interesting that was O'Gara's perspective. It was interesting Wilkinson was thinking along similar lines without talking with O'Gara. These were very separate, you know, places and points, and they both spotted it. And it just struck me as another thing for Farrell to have to try and regenerate almost. You know, let's get this team going again in that regard too, on top of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, if Sexton wants the captaincy, Sexton gets the captaincy. And sometimes, you know, as a player, Sexton almost needed protecting from himself because he was so flat to the line. He was putting himself in danger. He was taking big shots because he was such a brave player, such a selfless player, taking everything on himself. Sometimes, you know, the coach needs to maybe say, Johnny, you can't do everything. We won't allow you to do everything. Maybe we're at that point now. But if it's not Johnny, who is it?
That's the point.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we seem to have gone from a place in 2018 where there was big characters and leaders all over the place, and now we're down to a short list of kind of one as captain. And also, I think this team is in transition, and I think we have become, as a nation, we've kind of almost become kind of drunk on success that we're not allowed a transition period anymore. I think this is what we're in. We've seen some of these phenomenal Leinster players coming through. Maybe they're not quite ready, the Ryan Bairds and these guys, but they're coming through and they'll be ready soon. And maybe it's a time that we just have to cool our jets a little bit and wait for them to come.
Yeah, increasingly I'm coming around to that point of view, and I don't want my meaning misconstrued. I'm not saying Peter O'Mahony is not a leader. I'm making the point that when you're unsure of your place in the team, you know, when you're at that point, when enough players are at that point in your career, it can be hard. I'd say it was hard for Rory Best last year to feel like a leader going into a World Cup where he's saying to Joe Schmidt, by his own admission now in the last few days, you know, maybe I shouldn't actually be at this World Cup. You know, it's hard then to rally the troops or bark at other people. Yeah,
definitely. And even if you look at, Tom mentioned Leinster there, I mean, these guys don't seem to have a problem when they're in the Leinster setup now. I know the step up to international rugby is totally different, but it was interesting to hear Stuart Lancaster a few weeks ago, who is an outside voice coming in and seeing the setup. He felt like English players, maybe just by their makeup, were much more loud within dressing rooms. They were well able to speak up, and he's coming in and he's seen the likes of Gary Ringrose and James Ryan, who are quiet guys by nature, you know, so he's actually playing a role to try and get them. I guess it all kind of filters into taking on more responsibility. We've talked a bit about, you know, the second playmaker and things like this.
Yeah.
Without guys having the confidence, I think, to speak up within a group, I don't think that will happen. And I think he has this thing where he expects every player within his team meetings to come in with a question. The question might not get to be asked, but at least you're thinking about the game and you are ready to step up. And I don't know what goes on in Ireland's sort of leadership meetings at all, but that's sort of how Leinster go about it, and they don't seem to have a problem.
Yeah, and look, we're yes, Tom, go on. Yeah, final word on this.
Yeah, I just think this is. I mean, everyone wants the Ireland team to be challenging and winning every season.
Yeah.
But these are kind of, in the big picture, these are first world problems. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The team is not in that bad a shape. Okay, it's not in a great place, but it's not a destitute team. And we've got all this success coming in Leinster, top team in Europe, I would say right now, could win another European Cup, and this conveyor belt of players that will come into the Irish team soon. So it's, you know, we need to put it in perspective and maybe be a little bit patient. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think that's just where we are. It's just transition, as easy a term as that is. So yes, we have first world problems. This is not a disaster by any means, and you suspect the cycle will continue and Ireland will be fine. As for Scotland, they can't even organise a conference call. For the love of God.
Well, there's a story behind that.
So for people who know nothing of this, because obviously there's so much going on in the world, people may not have spent their day reading up on the fortunes of Scottish rugby. Once again, we're talking about Finn Russell and Gregor Townsend. So give us what happened here, or didn't.
So it emerged last Sunday, excuse me, that Finn Russell and Gregor Townsend have been talking. We kind of knew that. And that Finn Russell, they're beginning to patch up their differences. And that they were going to have a conference call on Monday or Tuesday? Monday, I think. And Finn Russell was going to be on the conference call, and all the Scotland coaches were going to be there, because obviously Finn Russell plays at Racing, and he was going to give the lowdown.
Yeah, this was going to be a conference call, not to repair the relationship and come back and play for us.
No.
Like you're sort of our scout in Paris.
Correct. Yeah. So he was going to give them the lowdown on the Racing players, the shape of the French attack, because he's a very good communicator, Finn. So he was going to give them all of that, and the conference call didn't take place. Danny Wilson was doing press the other day and said, "Oh yeah, the conference call didn't take place," and of course everyone went doolally, reading way too much into it. It didn't take place because I understand Finn Russell lost his phone, and it took place yesterday. So it took place 24 hours later.
Oh, so it's happened.
It has happened.
Oh,
yeah.
right, okay. And then he said things like Teddy Tom has a bad defender, did he? And really, it would crack the whole case.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but hopefully he was giving him a little bit of detail. But yeah, I mean,
it is just weird. Should they not have been more talking about Finn? Do you not want to come back and play? How can we sort this out?
No. Well, I was speaking to a few of them today. I interviewed Jamie Ritchie today in the team camp, and a few of them were talking, and they were saying that he could well have come back this week. He was ready to come back this week, but they thought if he came back, it would have been an absolute circus, which it would have been, and unfair on Adam Hastings, maybe unfair on the entire squad, and best just leave it until the summer tour, so that everyone can just chill out. So that's the situation at the moment. It looks very positive, Joe, after what has been a complete shambles.
That's interesting, because I must say, when Russell did that Sunday Times interview, this had the feel of a post-Saipan Mick or Roy situation. And unfortunately for Gregor Townsend, if Finn Russell would only be waiting in the wings for so long before public opinion would say we kind of want Finn back. So it's on the road to being properly repaired.
It is, and yeah, I was the same as you. Initially, I thought, because I did an interview with Gregor Townsend the day after the Finn Russell interview appeared in the Sunday Times. And he was hurt. He said, "I'm not hurt by it," but you could tell he was hurt. Clearly, he was hurt and angry. And I thought, wow, this could be curtains. But expedience is going to win the day here. And when you look back at it in hindsight, it was always going to win the day. Gregor Townsend needs Finn Russell because Finn Russell can help keep him in a job, and Finn Russell needs Gregor Townsend, and he needs Scotland because he wants to play for the Lions. Now, if Finn Russell is in exile and he's not playing international rugby, Warren Gatland, who's no major fan of his anyway, is going to find it very easy not to pick him. So Finn Russell knows that he has to play test rugby, and he has to go and play on the summer tour, 2 tests in South Africa, 1 in New Zealand. Next spring, he's got to go to Twickenham, he's got to go to Paris, and he's got to play well. And if he doesn't, then Warren Gatland ain't going to pick him. So it's mutually beneficial that this thing is patched up.
Okay. Cian, the French are coming to Murrayfield. They're looking very good thus far. Are you believing the hype? Is this the real deal?
Slowly but surely. I was a bit reluctant to at the start, but yeah, I don't know. There's something a bit different, I think, about them, but I'm still trying to be very careful in what I say. But just the Sean Edwards factor and everything in terms of what he's brought, like France's discipline has been so much better. They're obviously playing much better, and it's not all down to him, but you can't imagine that he took on this job without sort of being given the licence, to go in there and sort of put his stamp, his authority on it. It's interesting, like what Tom's saying, it's sort of bizarre for all those reasons that Scotland just aren't just biting the bullet and getting Finn Russell back. It's all well and good. It's like telling him the shape of France's attack, but they have analysis to do this as well. This is a guy in the prime of his career, the best player in the Scotland team, all things considered. But yeah, I think Adam Hastings has done well, but Scotland are a very different proposition, as we saw in Dublin when Finn Russell isn't in that team. So yeah, back to France, I am excited. I think I was doing a piece in today's paper. they've kind of gone a very different route after being knocked out of the World Cup quarter-final compared to Ireland. Andy Farrell is slowly sort of introducing young guys and guys who, like, in their mid-20s, kind of making their debut in the Six Nations, where they're obviously building towards a home World Cup in 4 years. It's still a long way away. I don't think we should get too obsessed with 4-year cycles, but it's a very different approach to what Ireland are doing here. But I mean, you just look at the calibre of players that you have. You mentioned Teddy Tama, Vakatawa, the halfbacks like Dupont and Ntamak. Like those two guys have the potential in the next couple of years to be the best out half, fly half combination. So yeah, it is a potential banana skin though, because Scotland have had their number over the last couple of years. So yeah, if Scotland were managed to do a job and the game goes ahead next week, it would just add another layer of intrigue to it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned the physicality Scotland showed in Dublin. You suspect they were kind of you kind of brought together a little bit post the Russell thing at that stage. I noted that Gregor Townsend went from saying we want to play the fastest tempo rugby in the world and segued pre-Six Nations to saying, well, we just want to be hard to beat. So where are the Scots? They're butchering chances, and Italy got at them at times last day out. Is there a sense that they might spring something here at Murrayfield?
At Murrayfield, there's always a chance, Joe. I mean, as Cian says, they beat France in 2018. They beat them in 2016. They also beat them at Murrayfield pre-World Cup. So Scotland have beaten France at Murrayfield the last 3 times. Albeit that's a different France that they've played. There is a sense that they could catch them. Townsend has gone from my way or the highway to now taking other people's opinions on board post-World Cup. The World Cup was such a disaster for him. He's completely changed. He's now listening to people in a way that he didn't listen to them before. So he's listening to... So Peter de Villiers has come in as a scrum coach, the former great French prop. Danny Wilson, former Cardiff coach. And Steve Tandy, who is his defence coach, who's made a huge difference. Huge difference. Scotland were so easy to score against. For the last 20 years, Scotland have been easy to score against. This season, Six Nations have conceded 2 tries in 3 games. Now, that is light years ahead of what they've been doing, and it does feed into what Gregor Townsend was saying pre-Six Nations, that they want to be harder to beat, they want to stay in the fight. It's a complete polar opposite to what he was saying before. They want to play the fastest brand in the rugby in the world. They want to be the most exciting team. That's gone now. That's for the birds. That ain't that's completely changed.
They've forgotten how to attack though, Tom, haven't they? That's what it looks like to me. They're still struggling to find this right balance. They've been good defensively, but they've sort of lost that attacking spark. Now I know obviously Finn Russell isn't there, but the balance just quite isn't right, is it? Yeah,
no, you're right, Cian. I mean, I say they've conceded 2 tries. They've scored 3 all against Italy. They've created loads and loads of chances against Ireland, loads of chances, and against Italy, loads of chances. They scored 3 against Italy. They could have had 6. The game against England was just played in a monsoon, so you kind of forget about that one. If they can get the balance right against France, if they can be more clinical and more ruthless and less predictable when they get into France's 22, as they have been in their first 3 games, they've got a right good chance. I'm with you, Cian. I'm not 100% sold on the French revival just yet. I think everybody in the media is desperate that this is the real deal, that they're back. And we're kind of hoping, but they've still a couple of tests to pass from me before we can declare them the finished article.
Yeah, OK. A quick word, fellas, before we go on the game at Twickenham, which should be really interesting on a host of fronts. So a bit like, I mean, last year it was the same as well. England's best performances are incredibly good. We saw it in Dublin 2019. They delivered the signature performance at the World Cup. And then we've also seen the wobbles. World Cup final, Paris at the start of this championship. So on the back of what they did to Ireland, Keane, let's see what England show up at Twickenham against Wales. And then Wales... Like Sean Edwards is emerging as the most valuable coach in world rugby right now. So Wales post Gatland Edwards, there is the beginnings of a question mark without getting too far ahead of ourselves. So this game really interesting.
Yeah, I was hugely impressed with England. Having been over there, it just reminded me exactly like what they did in the Six Nations in Dublin and then in Twickenham again with the pre-World Cup game. Just the physicality, very few teams can live with that, and Wales certainly won't be able to live with it if they bring it. they're looking in good shape. Obviously, the Mako Vunipola stuff was pretty bizarre this week when England saying that, you know, he'd put himself in self-isolation, and Saracens now saying that they're going to pick him this weekend. The Saracen circus just rolls on, doesn't it? It's just the gift that keeps on giving.
Have they not done enough, said Dan McDonnell earlier on?
You'd think they might keep their head down for a week, but no. But yeah, I was hugely impressed. I think I really like Wayne Pivac. I think he's a really impressive guy. It's such a tough job, like Andy Farrell, you know, taking over from such a big personality. This is going to take time because it's very, very different to the type of rugby that Wales were playing under Warren Gatland. But I think that he's deserved a bit of time. I mean, that Scarlett team that won the Pro 12 at the time were absolutely sensational to watch. But whether that translates to international rugby, it's a bit like Scotland, actually. They're going to have to try and find the right balance, because playing that all singing, all dancing sort of game plan isn't going to wash. So, yeah, they obviously slipped up against France, so you'd expect a backlash, but England at Twickenham, like we saw, they're just a different beast altogether there.
Yeah. Tom, we've about 30 seconds. England at Twickenham is kind of the point here, isn't it?
It is the point, and it's England power at Twickenham, and England with a bit of feel good. And I think England could win this by 20 points plus. I'm not impressed by Wales. I think they're in a bit of no man's land now. They're not sure what type of game they need to play. Tom English of the BBC. Thanks very much, Tom. Much appreciated. Cian Tracey Cheers, lads.
of the Irish Independent. Thanks a million, Cian.
Cheers, Joe.
Our rugby coverage brought to you with Vodafone, team of us, everyone in. Back in 1 sec.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.
The Pat Kenny Show.
On tomorrow's programme, the Garda fight against money laundering. Will we